Hello, I want to welcome you to another Bible study. I'm Dennis Tucker, and I preach at the Lilac Church of Christ in Wichita, Kentucky. On Wednesday nights, we've been studying the time period that deals with Ezra and Nehemiah. And we're in the book of Nehemiah, which means that we're basically dealing with the time period about 444 to maybe as late as 432 BC. And it deals, Nehemiah, where Ezra dealt primarily with the rebuilding of the temple, and then some of the reforms that need to be done among the children of Israel. And one of those was their marriage into people of the land and trying to take care of that problem. Nehemiah's focus mainly is upon building the walls around Jerusalem. And that's what we're going to pick up tonight in Nehemiah, the third chapter. And as you look at Nehemiah, third chapter, it's one of those chapters, quite frankly, that when you look at it, you'll see a lot of names, you'll see a lot of detailed information. And if you're not careful, after a little while, that you kind of get glossy-eyed and you start kind of losing your focus and you kind of fall asleep on it. And that's because it deals with the distribution of the work on the wall. And therefore, it reads much like you would think about a contractor's description of what's going to be done. And that is that what Nehemiah does is they takes this big work. After all, Jerusalem is a big city, and he divides up in small parts, small integrals. And then he goes and assigns specific individuals, specific families to a specific part of that wall and the gates and all the other parts that had to be rebuilt. And again, anytime you have a huge job, and this was one of those huge jobs, what you do is you have to start with the small stuff and take it one step at a time. If you look at the whole job and try to take care of it all without any individual breakdowns and assignments, it's never going to get done. If you simply said, okay, folks, let's go out there and build a wall, just been mass confusion. And so what it does is you go through here, we have, again, names, and we have families that talked about, their children talked about, and quite a variety of people, quite frankly. That you have some people that lived in Jerusalem working on it, some people that did not live in Jerusalem. You had the priests, you had Levites mentioned, you had some of the elders mentioned, or some of the noble people mentioned, you had the common workers mentioned, but that's the way it was to be done. And also, as you go through this chapter, the third chapter, you're going to find that if you have a map of the city of Jerusalem, if you go and look and maybe Google it, and just kind of type in the city of Jerusalem during the days of Nehemiah. And you'll get a rough map of it, a picture of it, and you'll find as you go read through chapter 3, and kind of start at one point in particular, and that is when you start as in Nehemiah, the first chapter, talks about the sheep gate. And then as you go through and talks about the fact of the Tower of the 100. And verse 1, and then it goes on and talks about other places in that wall there. It talks about the old gate in verse 6. And as you go all the way through this chapter, you'll find that it's simply working its way around the city of Jerusalem, was what we are finding in that passage. And again, that's what has to be done. Every part had to be taken care of, because after all, if you don't take care of every part, let's say you just leave one section undone, well, that's where the enemy is going to attack. That's simply still a very vulnerable city. And much like your house, you decide we're going to winterize our house. We're going to make it where it'll be nice and warm during wintertime. But you know what? We're going to leave one of the windows open. Well, that doesn't work, does it? Or if you say we're going to leave a door open, or we're going to insulate everything except for this one wall, and that's the wall that's going to like the cold air in. And so this was important because every section of the wall had to be taken care of. Again, it starts at the sheep gate, and it goes, and in verse 1, if you go all the way down, read through verse 32, you'll find that again it mentions the sheep gate, and that is they had gone through every part of the wall of the towers around Jerusalem. If you look at verse 5, it says, but then the Tikhonites made repairs, but their nobles did not put their shoulders to the work of the Lord. Now, Tekoa is a town that's mentioned in connection with the prophet Amos, Amos 1, verse 1. And again, it's outside Jerusalem, north of Jerusalem. But in particular here, it said that the nobles, And that is those men that in some translations may say the exalted ones or the leading men of town leaders, the people that you expect to actually be involved in this, were not actually putting their shoulders to the work. In other words, they were standing by and watching, and they weren't simply taking part of this. And this had to be a great source of discouragement, because after all, these are men that would benefit from the wall as much as anybody else, and they would have the means maybe of doing more than other people. They could actually help more with maybe the supplies and the food, things like that. And you just got to think about that in contrast to Nehemiah, because Nehemiah is totally involved in this work right here. But then so that kind of gets you through chapter 3. Again, a lot of detailed information there, so I don't have to spend a lot of time with it. Read through it and just kind of notice the variety of people involved in it. But also, not everybody did. There's always a few. No matter what the work is, there's always a few that's going to say, I just don't have the time, or I think somebody else will need to do it. And so when we go to chapter 4, though, we see some opposition building. Now, opposition is expressed in Ezra, around Ezra, the 4th chapter, when the people of the land surrounding the children of Israel saw them building the temple, saw them maybe start a little bit on the walls, and they wrote back to the king and said, you can't allow this to happen. And they pointed out all the bad things about the Jews, some of it exaggeration, some of it true. And so they stopped for a while. Well, now here in Nehemiah, they're starting with the walls again, and we find again that their enemies are not very happy about it. And so we can look in Nehemiah 4, verse 1, we read about a man by the name of Sanballat. And verse 1, it says they're furious and very indignant and mocked the Jews and made fun of them. And as go on, you find some of the things they were saying. And he, in particular, said, what are these feeble Jews doing? What are these silly people doing out there? Will they fortify themselves? They actually don't think they're going to be able to build a wall. They think this don't make them secure. It says, will they offer sacrifices? They already were doing that on the altar. So what's the point of this wall here? They already have their sacrifices. Well, they complete it in a day. Now, obviously, the answer to that's going to be no, but they didn't have to complete it in a day. And, a lot of times people, when they try to discourage you, when they try to stop you doing something, they ask questions a lot of times, or they try to make points that are really not relevant. That's what right there is. Will they do it in a day? Well, no, it won't take a day, but it's not going to take long either. And then it says, will they revive stones from the heaps of rubbish stones that are burned? And so the stones that were there, maybe some of them have broken apart. And are they going to use those stones to actually build this wall? Maybe another way of saying that. And then you have Tobiah, the Ammonite. Now, Sanballat was kind of northwest. He's from the place of Horon, and so that's northwest of Jerusalem. And then you have east of Jerusalem, you have the Ammonites. So here's the Ammonite, and he says, what are they build? If even a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. Just take a silly old fox, just take an animal, he'll just push that wall right on over. It won't stop anybody. It's not going to stop any troops. What are they doing? And so what they're doing, obviously, is they're ridiculing the activity, trying to discourage the Jews. And one of the things I get from this here is never let your enemies set your goals. Never let them define what you're doing for you. That's up to you to determine your goals. That's up to you to define what your goals really are. And so verse 4, we find Nehemiah's response to this. And verse 4 says, hear, O Lord, hear, O our God. And so he has a prayer here. And he said, we are despised. Turn their reproach on their own heads and give them as plunder to the land of the captivity. Do not cover their iniquity. Do not let their sin be blotted out before you, for they have provoked you to anger before the builders. And so here's a prayer to God, and really a prayer saying, go ahead and punish them. Go ahead and use your justice on these folks. Go ahead and because they have despised your name. It wasn't necessarily Nehemiah saying, look what they've done to us, but look what they've done to you. And so he simply said, God, go ahead and use your justice on them. And so that really did not stop the children of Israel. So then Sanballat goes to plan B, we may say. And if you read verse 7 through 8 in this chapter 4, and it said that basically said, when Sanballat and Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were being restored, and so they're working on it, and they see that the gates were beginning to be closed, and they became very angry. Okay, plan B, what are we going to do now? All of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion. And so now instead of just ridicule, now it's more along the lines of physical threats. We don't want to attack you. And it's interesting, you read through this here, how this apparently wasn't a secret. And it wasn't like they're saying, don't tell the Jews we're going to attack them or anything like that. It was well known that they're going to plan to attack the Jews here. And so in order to overcome that, again, what does Nehemiah do? Well, again, leadership says we have to approach things, we have to have answers, we have to have solutions. And so he does, verse 9, he says, we made our prayer to our God. Okay, first thing again, a prayer. Not forgetting God. The reason they were there is because God had restored them back to the land. If those walls are going to be rebuilt, it's because God is on their side. And it's go through actually, they're on God's side, I should have said. And then also it said, we set a guard against them day and night. So, it's good to pray, but also there's parts we have to do. And so they set up guards to protect themselves, to keep watch out for their enemies. And then as you go on through here, so they're working now. They have some guards out there to watch for enemies attacking them. And then verse 10, we see another problem. And so the strength of the laborers is failing, and there's so much rubbish that we are not able to build the wall. In other words, we're tired. This is hard work, and we've been working on this for a while now. And so we're getting tired. And then they said that our adversaries said, and so they're saying, well, look what these other folks are saying about us. So basically, they're tired. There's a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of work to do. And then they say, well, almost like if this is not going to work, we're not going to get this done. And so, and our adversary started saying, and what was the adversary saying? And it said, they will neither know nor see anything until we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease. So again, it's still basically the gloom and doom thing here. We're going to come in, we're going to kill you. And go on, verse 12 says, so it was, when the Jews who dwelt near them came, they told us 10 times, for whatever place you turn, they will be upon us. And so they're listening to their enemies. Again, you have to be careful who you listen to, about where you take advice from. And so we have murmuring that's going on here, that people are complaining. I can almost hear them saying, I'm tired and I'm thirsty and I'm hungry, those kind of things. And I'm afraid of what's going to happen. And then also the kind of a defeatist attitude. And that is that basically, again, listen to our enemies. No matter where we go, they're going to kill us. We're going to die. That was what they were saying. And so what does Nehemiah do? Here on verse 13, it says, therefore, and so here's what it does here. It says, I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings, and I set the people according to the famine with their swords, their spears, and their bows. So first thing he prays to God, okay, then he goes out there and positions people for protection. He just does say, well, God protect us, and then doesn't do anything. It's kind of like us. We may say, well, God protect my house, but you know what? We have to lock the door. So what it does, protection. Have the men out there with swords, the spears, and bows. If they're going to come and fight us, we're going to be ready for the fight. And in verse 14 it says, and I looked, and arose, said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. What Nehemiah is doing here is he's in the focus what this is all about. And that's not just about building a wall. It is about protecting their families. It's protecting their wives, their sons, and their daughters, and their own houses. It's about what they receive out of this, the protection they're going to receive. And so he gets them focused, instead of on the enemies, upon the good of this wall. And as go on, we find in verse 15, it says, and it happened when our enemies heard that was known to us, and that God had brought their plot to nothing, that all of us returned to the wall, everyone to his work. And so they get back to working. And so it was from that time on that half of my servants worked at construction, while the other half held the spears, the shields, the bows, and wore armor. And the leaders were behind all the house of Judah. Those who built on the wall, those who carried burdens, loaded themselves so that with one hand they worked at construction, with the other held a weapon. Every one of the workers had a sword girded at his side as he built, and every one who sounded his trumpet was beside him. And what I see here is this balance. If everybody had just put down their shovels and their axes and their whatever, their picks and whatever else they may have, their levels, then nothing gotten done. And if everybody had just picked up the instruments to build with, or hammers, and again, their saws, stuff like that, then they would have been vulnerable. But there had to be both. They had to work and they had to protect themselves. There had to be this balance between the two. And that's what Nehemiah has here, the sense of balance in this passage. And as we go through this here, we find that Nehemiah, that he developed these plans to protect his people. In verse 19. And that is that the work is great and extensive. We are separated far from one another on the wall. Now again, today we have modern technology, modern ability to communicate. But I'm sure when they were working on this wall, the other side over there seemed far away. And so what are we going to do? We are scattered about here. What are we going to do? He says, verse 20, wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. And so he mentioned earlier, you have people with trumpets out there. And the point is that when something happened, maybe they started being attacked, maybe they saw people started to approach them, that they would blow the trumpets, and everybody else from all the other parts of the wall would run there, and they would all be together to fight. And so that's what he's doing here. And he says, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there, our God will fight for us. And he goes on. And he says, let each man and servant stay at night in Jerusalem, so they may be our guard by night and a working party by day. So he really sets up this protection, this almost like an alarm system here, so that they will not be vulnerable to their enemies. And again, all of this here shows is wise leadership. And then we realize we have to have protection. We have to realize the balance between doing and protecting ourselves when there's a threat, of working together and also helping one another, being there for one another when danger occurs. Again, you have some, and so the wall's being built. Okay, chapter 5 is almost, some will say, like a parenthetical statement. And did this happen before? Did this happen? The walls were built. Did this happen afterward? Did it happen during the time period of the building walls? I'm not really sure it makes a lot of difference, but there's a problem that's addressed here. And the problem is, basically, you have these people, the Jews, who were very well off, and they had plenty of money. You had other Jews who were poor, and they are working at the walls, and they're starving to death, or they're hungry, and so they had to have food. They had to borrow money. And here's what they said. They said in chapter 5, verse 2, we, our sons, and our daughters are many. Therefore, let's get grain that we may eat and live. And that's pretty well normal, right? I mean, people need food. They have to have water. They have to have clothes. They have to have things like that. So they said, we have mortgaged our lands and vineyards and houses that we might buy grain because of the famine. And so they do what they do. That is, you have to go out and get it. So they had to borrow money. They had to mortgage their things. And so we have borrowed money for the king's tax on our heads and vineyards. So we have built up a debt. And it says that our brethren, their brethren are taking advantage of them. And they said, indeed, we are forcing, verse 5, we are forcing our daughters and our sons' daughters to be slaves. And some of our daughters have been bought into slavery. It's not in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. So that what they're saying is, and this really is a contradiction to the law of Moses. The law of Moses, if somebody is poor, they were to loan without interest. And so these people here were basically loaning out money, charging interest, getting the people in debt, and then taking advantage of them. And the idea of selling into slavery. Now, again, according to Jewish law, if somebody sold himself into slavery, you had the year of Jubilee, which is every 7 years. And then that person would be free. You had the 50th year with a high Jubilee, and so, again, they would be free. Well, apparently that wasn't happening here. And so they're just pointing out here that this doesn't seem fair. This is not according to the law, but it doesn't seem fair. And Nehemiah, when he hears about this, that he gets very angry. In verse 7, he said, after serious thought, I rebuked the nobles and rulers, said to them, each is exacting usury from his brother. Now, I used the word interest earlier, and the term usury is used in my translation. And some believe that the idea was, again, exorbitant interest rates of basically almost like extortion. We may use that phrase there. And again, I said earlier that the law really forbid this. And in Exodus 22, verse 25, it says, if you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, it shall not be like the moneylender to him. You shall not charge him interest. If you ever take your brother's garment as a pledge, you'll return it to him before the sun goes down. And so there's protection here to these poor folks. And they weren't receiving it. And so Nehemiah, verse 5, he first of all says, restore. Restore now to them even this day, knows what? Their lands, their vineyards, the olive groves, their houses, and 100th of the money and the grain, the new wine, the oil that you have charged them. And the 100th of the money seems to apply the idea again of interest, of paying back what they had charged them in interest. So basically, he said, you're going to restore it. You're going to give back to them. Because again, it's somebody contrary to the law. And also, the poor were doing a lot of work on the wall. And so that seemed that, that's addressing the problem. And as an example of that, in the last part of chapter 5, Nehemiah talks about himself. And Nehemiah, now he was sent there by Artaxerxes, the king. And apparently Nehemiah had some wealth, he had position of authority and power. And Nehemiah could easily have taken this position of authority and power and used it for his own benefit. But he says in Nehemiah 5, verse 14, neither I nor my brothers ate the king's provisions. But the former governors who were before me laid burdens on the people, and I took from them bread and wine, besides 40 shekels of silver. Yes, even their servants bore rule over the people, but I did not do so, because of fear of God. And he doesn't mention the former rulers. Now we know Zerubbabel, when he came back about 100 years earlier, that he was not that kind of person. And so it's not talking about him, but again, some of the readings that I had, it said that there was basically about 3 different governors ahead of between Zerubbabel and Nehemiah. And so he's saying that those folks were the ones that took advantage of the people. He said, I did not do that. And he says, we did not buy any land. And it goes on, verse 18, he said, now that which was prepared daily was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep, and also fowl that were prepared for me, and every 10 days an abundance of all kinds of wine. Yet in spite of this, I did not demand the governor's provisions, because the bondage was heavy on the people. And again, governor's provision sounds as if it talks about maybe what, again, he could tax the people, and so he would have plenty of money, plenty of food himself. So I didn't do that. He provided for the people. And that example that he set for them. And then in the last part of chapter 5, he simply says this. He says, remember me, my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people. And so that's all that Nehemiah wanted in return, was to be remembered for good that he had done. Well, we go on to chapter 6 then. And we find that the enemies of Jerusalem, Sanballat, Tobiah particularly, we're not just going to stand by and say, okay, well, we've been beaten, that they had more plans. And so one of those plans in chapter 6 was to actually send word to Nehemiah and say, come and meet us in the plains. Come and meet us among the villages, the plain of Ono. And it says, verse 2 there, that they thought to do me harm. So basically, we're going to get Nehemiah out here, and we're going to probably kill him, was their idea. We're going to threaten him and kill him once he comes out here. And so Nehemiah was aware of that. And what Nehemiah did is Nehemiah basically says no, but the way he said no is important here. In verse 3, he says, I'm doing a great work so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and go down to you? Many of sermon has been based on these verses, and that is, you're doing something good, why stop? Why stop now? Just keep on doing good. Don't pay attention to your enemies. Don't pay attention to those complaining and griping, those who make threats against you. Just keep on doing your good work. And then it's going, Sanballat now writes a letter. And the letter basically says that, again, back to the king, the letter says, verse 5, verse 6 says, they plan to rebel. These Jews are going to rebel. And they're rebuilding a wall that you may be their king. In other words, these charged Nehemiah trying to be king over the people of Jerusalem, setting up his own empire, basically. And so it said, now these matters will be reported to the king in verse 7. So come therefore, let us consult together. So again, the charge is made. And basically Nehemiah again says, nope, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to meet with you. And going down to verse 6, we find that Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Mehetabel, he was a secret informer, and he said, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple. Let us close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you. Indeed, at night they will come to kill you. In other words, this guy comes up to Nehemiah now, and he's pretending to be on Nehemiah's side. He said, they're going to come and kill you. Let's run into the temple. And maybe that was a way of kind of disgracing Nehemiah. Maybe there they could kill him. Maybe it would be a bad example to the people around him. But Nehemiah's response, verse 11 is, and who is there such as I who would go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in. Nehemiah was on a run from this. And so you go to verse 13, it says, for this reason I was hired, that I should be afraid and act that way and sin, so they might have cause for an evil report, they may reproach me. And so they're trying to ruin his reputation, is what they're trying to do here. And it's going here in the 6th chapter. To me, one of the amazing statistics or facts about this is listed in verse 15. And that is they finished the walls in 52 days. Less than 2 months. For over, all these years, from about 589, 586 BC to 440 BC, the wall's been down. And it only took 52 days for them to rebuild the walls. And we find that the response of this here in verse 16 is that the enemies were disheartened in their own eyes. They saw that their threats and their attempts had done nothing, that the wall had been rebuilt. And so in verse 17 of the 6th chapter, it said, in those days the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and the letters of Tobiah came to them. And it said, also they reported his good deeds before me and reported my words to him. Tobiah sent letters to frighten me. So but Tobiah is trying to again be kind of like the spy, and we find out that he had married into some of the Jewish family, and one of the Jewish families, and basically is trying to again kind of find out what's going on and use it for his advantage. Let me give you a few lessons, then a few points in particular in the lesson viewers. One is, when you read Nehemiah 3rd chapter, you see the importance of wise leadership. Nehemiah basically gets everybody involved, various stations of life, priests, Levites, rich, poor, families, sons and daughters, and people outside Jerusalem, inside Jerusalem. He gets everybody involved in building a wall. And it's always important to get everybody involved if you're going to be successful in a large task. The second thing is balance. Balance between the workers and weapons. Balance in our lives between recreation and work. Balance between taking care of ourselves and thinking about other people. There always have to be balance in life. Another thing is, trumpets were the alarm sound system. And those trumpets were used so as to basically to call the people and tell them to come running, to help each other. Today we have telephones, we have other means of contacting one another, but when we need help, we need to sound the alarm. And we need to come running also when we hear that. And finally, the problem of solving greed. That problem of greed. And Nehemiah condemned these folks because they're taking advantage of the poor. And he tells them, you're going to give back what you're taking from them. You're going to restore it back to them. But then also Nehemiah set the right example. It's important for us to make sure that we do the right thing, that we are fulfilling our responsibilities and setting the right example. So Nehemiah does these things, and what we learn from these passages. I appreciate your kind attention. And let me invite you to come be with us at Lilac Road Church of Christ in Litchfield, Kentucky. Our building is located 1687 Lilac Road. Our time services Sunday morning at 9:30 we have Bible classes, 10:25 worship, Sunday evenings at 5 p.m. we have worship. And on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. we have Bible class again. If I can answer any questions for you from the Bible, a study that we've had here, or other type of questions, let me know, and I'll be glad to correspond with you. Hope you have a good week.